Hi guys, welcome back to part 2 of this lecture, which is lecture 6. Okay, here we go. All right, so we talked last time about deuterostomia, specifically about echinoderms, sea stars, and friends, and now we are going to leave chapter 33 and move on to chapter 34, which is mostly about vertebrates. But vertebrates are members of the phylum Chordata, and so we're going to start out by talking about chordates, and we're going to talk about shared derived characteristics of chordates. What is a shared derived characteristic? If you don't remember, it's a characteristic that that we infer was present in the common ancestor of a clade or monophyletic group, and it's unique to members of this particular group. Okay, and then we will meet the sister group of vertebrates, and then we'll talk about the same thing, shared derived characteristics of vertebrates. All right, there's your questions. Where is our tail? Question I often have. Okay, so I think this is the last time I'm going to show you this giant phylogeny of living animals, but we are here both in terms of where we've gotten to in this course and also because we are chordates. All right, so what is a chordate? What are these shared derived characteristics of chordates? So as you can tell, if you go back and look at the phylogeny, chordates are members of Bilateria, these animals, this large group of animals that includes things like arthropods that have bilateral symmetry for their body plan, at least at some point during their development. And as we've just been talking about, chordates are members of the group Deuterostomata, so they are deuterostomes. But as I said, they're defined by the set of derived characters. And in many species, but certainly not all, some of these characters are only present and visible during embryonic development. So there's 4 of them, and I'll go through each in turn, starting out with the notochord. So the notochord is basically a structural component. So it's something that in vertebrates is replaced during embryonic development by the more complex mineralized skeleton. But it's present during embryonic development in all chordates, including vertebrate chordates. So in non-vertebrate chordates, it is retained, and in adults, and it provides, well, not all adults. I'll give you an exception. Don't worry about it. It's there, okay? Take my word for it. And basically, its function is like that of the vertebral column in vertebrates. It provides some skeletal support, and it's sort of made of this weird combination of these large fluid-filled cells that surround fibrous tissue that provides this support. Okay, second and really critical feature of chordates is a nerve cord. And this is something that develops, it develops from the ectoderm. So this is the outer germ layer during embryonic development. Remember that all the animals we're talking now are triploblastic. They have 3 germ layers, and ectoderm is the outer layer. And the cells roll up into a hollow neural tube during embryonic development, and that's why it's sort of defined as being a hollow nerve cord. And importantly, though, you know, chordates are certainly not the only animals that have brains in a head. The placement of the developing nervous system as dorsal, right? This is like we're looking at some sort of generic ancestral chordate, and this is its back, right? So the dorsal nerve cord is above the notochord, and as I said, it develops into the central nervous system, so the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, number 3. are the pharyngeal clefts or slits. And so these are grooves on the side of the pharynx in chordate embryos. And so in us, our pharynx is kind of the back of our throat. But as you can see in this is an aquatic organism, this generic chordate. And so in most chordates, most meaning the majority of species, these develop into slits that have functions like including suspension feeding or gas exchange, as in the gills of fish. In tetrapods, which we will meet next week, these are vertebrates that have 4 limbs, which includes us, of course. The pharyngeal slits actually develop into parts of the ear and jaw. Okay, that's number 3. Number 4, last but not least, is the muscular postanal tail. And so again, this structure clearly reflects the fact that chordates, like all animals, evolved in an aquatic environment. So the origin of chordates, like everything else that we've talked about, is in the Cambrian, right? So the Paleozoic, relatively early Paleozoic. And so in an aquatic environment, the function of this is pretty obvious, that it helps with moving the animal through the water. But in many vertebrates that have evolved subsequently, it's greatly reduced and only present at a brief stage, sometimes during embryonic development. So these are the 4 share-derived characters of chordates that you should know and appreciate. All right, and this is just to show you that we are chordates. We are no exception to these rules. Here on the left-hand side is a human embryo at about week 6, and you can see that, you can't see that it's muscular, but you can certainly see that there is indeed a little tail there. So we too have tails. It's a structure that kind of regresses after about 2 weeks, so it's usually gone by about week 8 of a human embryonic development, but nonetheless is there. And this is also a slightly earlier stage, week 5, that is an image that shows really clearly these pharyngeal clefts that in us, as in many other vertebrates, will later develop into parts of the jaw and ear. Okay, all right. So this is the next large phylogeny that we're going to be working with for the next couple of lectures. And just when you thought you were done with these things, now it turns out that we can take a little part of it, this is the chordates, and expand it substantially. The good news is that the animals that we're going to be talking about, not so much today, but on Monday, are things that are going to be a lot more familiar to you, and therefore perhaps easier to remember than the things that we've talked about so far. But right now, we're just looking at this phylogeny, and so we've left Echinodermata up there that we just talked about in the first part of this lecture. So these are sea stars and sea urchins and the mighty sea cucumber. And it would be true to say that that echinoderms share ancient common ancestry with chordates. It don't worry about it, but it shows them here as the sister group to chordates, and I'm not sure that that's correct. Regardless, so moving on to chordates, let me just kind of orient you to this part of the tree. So this is down the side, we have these bars and showing these progressively more restrictive groups. And so the bar that goes all the way to the top here is chordates, right? And so this is everything, and then vertebrates starts here. But back here, we're focusing on the common ancestor of chordates. And here are these characters that we're gonna go through as we go through vertebrates. But this is the notochord is one of the 4 shared derived characteristics that I've just gone through that unite chordates, which includes these 2 clades, the cephalochordates, and the urochordates. So as always, we are interested in knowing what is the closest living relative of group X, in this case, chordates, oh, sorry, in this case, vertebrates. So yeah, these guys are chordates, but they're not vertebrates. All right, and so these are the two living groups that are most closely related to vertebrates. And so the cephalochordates are, neither of them are like very dramatic or exciting. I don't think, they don't invert their stomachs or do anything. Tunicates do something cool, I'll tell you about in a sec. But they're not like super spectacular. But the lancelets are these little kind of like pipe-shaped things that for until the advent of being able to sequence DNA, where everyone had their money on those guys being the closest living relative of vertebrates, because they kind of look a lot more like what we think of as a vertebrate than adult urochordates do. However, it turns out, based on molecular data, that it's actually the urochordates, the tunicates, that are the closest living relative of vertebrates. And to help you remember this is again one of these groups where the adult form of the organism is very misleading in terms of trying to remember characteristics that might link it to, in this case, vertebrates. But here is the larval form of a urochordate. And one of the reasons that it took people a long time to figure out that these were actually closely related to vertebrates is that the larval form can be very brief in duration, just a couple of minutes. So literally you blink and you miss it. But looking at this larvae, you can see that it kind of likely has the shared derived characteristics of chordates, certainly, and it is a bilaterally symmetrical animal. So not to confuse you guys, these urochordates are the closest living relative of vertebrates, but they're kind of a weird group, and their adult form is certainly a derived feature of this group, right? There are no vertebrates that have this structure, and the way they make their living, they're marine, and they attach to the substrate as adults, and then they have these two siphons, one that pulls in water, they're filter feeders, and one that pushes it out. And they do have a neural tube during embryonic development, but interestingly, as adults, their nervous system completely degenerates. Apparently, they do not need it because they're just sucking water in. And then their claim to fame is that they will, when disturbed, they will squirt water out of the siphon that is for that purpose. And they will do this when they're disturbed, and they get their common name of sea squirts from this exciting behavior. However, they are the sister group to vertebrates. Okay, all right, so we are now in vertebrates. So this is the inclusive bar for vertebrates, and obviously kind of the defining feature of vertebrates is having vertebrae, a vertebral column or a backbone. But I'm going to give you some other key shared-derived characteristics of vertebrates. All right, so basically a vertebrate is a chordate that has a backbone. Remember, they have the characteristics of chordates with extra stuff. All right, and so the first obvious thing, as I've just said, is a skeleton that includes a backbone that's comprised of vertebrae. And the two of kind of the most ancient members of Vertebrata that we'll meet early next week actually have greatly reduced their backbone, but this is, again, a secondarily evolved kind of loss of vertebrae. The second key feature of vertebrates, which is not something you can see looking at structures that are just morphological, is they have this unique set of cells during embryonic development that are called neural crust cells. And this is not a separate germ layer. These derive from the outer germ layer, the ectoderm, but they're unique in terms of what their ultimate fate is, what they develop into. And so this is a figure from this chapter that the neural crust cells are shown in green here. And this is showing these classic features of chordates during early embryonic development, the presence of a notochord and this hollow neural tube, and that also develops from ectoderm. And then the green cells are these developing neural crust cells that kind of are part of the outside of the neural tube. And then during development, they migrate out from the neural tube and go on not exclusively to form parts of the nervous system. They also form parts of bones, and in our case, cartilage in the skull and in the jaw. But they also are involved in some neuronal structures, including sensory systems. So they're really a key feature of vertebrates. All right, and then so vertebrates have a complex nervous system. This is not to say that other organisms we've talked about so far don't have a nervous system. So insects have brains and a nervous system, but the type of nervous system that vertebrates have is unique. And the fourth feature of vertebrates is that all vertebrates have 2 or more sets of Hox genes. So if you remember, I mentioned Hox genes in the first lecture as basically a shared derived feature of all eumetazoa, animals with tissues. And I told you that these genes are critical to development in terms of animal body plans. And these are multiple genes. So that's why we talk about them as a set, right? But having more than one set of these genes that are critical to the development of structures like the head and the tail and the limbs, having an extra set or 2 extra sets can kind of facilitate the evolution of novel structures, because it basically gives some wiggle room to for adaptation, right? To evolve structures that are unique, because you have this extra set of genes determining these structures. And we'll talk about this more as we go forward. But for now, you should just know that a shared derived characteristic of vertebrates is that they have, rather than one set of Hox genes as other animals do, they have 2 or more sets. Okay, and that is it for today and for this week. So congratulations, you got through 2 weeks now of 5B, and I hope you guys have a good weekend, a safe weekend, a socially distanced weekend, but not a socially isolated weekend. Those things are hard to manage these days, but I hope you guys accomplished that. Okay, bye for now.